Hello. The work I will be introducing to you today is Dongin's Unofficial History Collection 3, Dark Clouds over Songgyeong by Kim Dong-in, a pioneer of modern Korean literature. This story is set during the turbulent era when the 500-year-old Goryeo dynasty was coming to an end and the Joseon dynasty was newly founded. It is often said that history is a record written by the victors, but the gaze of this narrative looks somewhere a little different. It shows us Taejo-yi Songgye, who established a new nation and ascended to the seat of ultimate power, yet agonized over his failure to win the hearts of the people. It also tells the story of the loyal subjects of Dumundong, who rejected the new dynasty and hid deep in the mountains, declaring, "A loyal subject cannot serve two kings." Absolute power clashing with unbreakable conviction. Let us now step together into the tragic and sorrowful hidden side of history, and into the story of the ancient capital Goryeo, where those dense, dark clouds once hung heavy. Dongin's Unofficial History Collection 3, Dark Clouds over Songgyeong, author of Dumundong. In the early days of our Taejo's reign, 72 scholars refused to submit to the new dynasty. They fled to the foot of Mount Mansusen, locked their doors, and refused to come out. When the government summoned them, they came out holding whips, declaring, "We would rather be merchants," and scrambled to avoid serving. Helplessly, they were all put to death to fulfill their principles. An excerpt from Jo Won-myung's monument. Taejo personally visited Gyeongdeokgung Palace to hold a civil service examination, intending to lure them out. However, the 72 scholars threw off their official hats, wore bamboo hats, carried straw mats on their backs, and fled over the hill in front of Gyeongdeokgung. Not a single person stepped forward to take the exam. Taejo, enraged, ordered their huts to be burned down. After the ascension of Taejo of Joseon, 72 loyal subjects of the former Goryeo dynasty refused to pledge allegiance to him. They fled to the foot of Mount Mansu, hid there, and closed their doors to the world. When the government summoned them, they came out holding whips, implying they would rather become lowly merchants and competed to avoid serving. Left with no other choice, the government had them all killed. Taejo intended to summon the loyalists of Goryeo by personally overseeing a civil service examination at Gyeongdeokgung Palace. However, the 72 scholars threw off their official caps, put on humble bamboo hats, carried straw mats on their backs, and fled over the pass in front of the palace. Not a single one attended. Enraged, Taejo set fire to their shacks. The 16th day of the 7th lunar month, in the 25th year of Hongwu of the Ming dynasty, 1392. The 500-year-old Wang dynasty of Goryeo had collapsed. Yi Songgye, a military general who had served as the chief minister until just yesterday, ascended to the throne and took command of the entire Korean peninsula. The triumph of the new king, who had finally achieved his long-held ambition, was extraordinary. Looking back to his youth, when he was hiding in a cave on Mount Seolbong in Anbyeon, the monk Muhak prophesied, "You will one day become king." Since that day, the ambition deeply etched into his heart had finally come to fruition. During King Gongmin's reign, he had been suppressed by the power of the Chancellor Shindon and never had a chance to even dream of it. But after Shindon's death, the passing of King Gongmin, and the ascension of the young King Yu, the astonishing drama he had systematically orchestrated finally succeeded today. Seeing his former colleagues, who had served the same king alongside him until yesterday, now bowing deeply before him, was a thrilling validation of his ambition. But more than that, the realization that this vast territory of 3,000 li, an ancient land renowned as the Eastern nation of courtesy for 3,800 years since Dangun, unified into a single entity by Goryeo's founder Wang Geon, was now his to rule, brought an incomparable joy. Now that this land is in my hands, I must build a great nation. First, I must ensure the people can live in peace. Second, I must make it clearly known that my rebellion was not merely out of greed for the throne. Thus, the new king made plans to solidify his newly acquired kingdom. However, there was one crucial thing he had overlooked. He forgot how deeply the Confucian teaching that a loyal subject does not serve two kings was embedded in the hearts of the people, having been the state religion for nearly 1,000 years. The ministers who had secretly conspired with the new king since the Goryeo era, Jongdojeon, Jojun, Namon, Simdeokbu, Goryeo, and others, naturally supported the new nation, but the other subjects of Goryeo refused to answer his call. He summoned the remaining scholars of the former dynasty, such as Yi Saek, Gil Jae, and Woncheon Sok, along with many other ministers, but none responded. He then tried summoning those of slightly lesser standing, but still no one came. Yi Saek, a renowned scholar who had passed the state examination during King Gongmin's reign and risen to the highest rank of Sejong, was highly revered by all the people of Goryeo. He also had a long-standing personal relationship with the new king. Therefore, immediately after ascending the throne, the new king summoned this famous scholar. He believed that if he could just get this scholar on his side, the many literati and commoners who admired him would follow suit. But how did this famous scholar react to the new king? Yi Saek did answer the summons and entered the palace. However, he only offered a slight bow and refused to prostrate himself. Suppressing his displeasure, the king stepped down from his throne and respectfully welcomed him. But later, during a royal lecture when the king returned to his throne, Yi Saek abruptly stood up. "There is no place for this old man to sit," he declared, standing firmly. It was an incredibly insolent act, but the king endured it. He earnestly pleaded for Yi Saek's help in building the new nation. Yi Saek replied, "What right does an old scholar of a ruined nation have to speak presumptuously? I would consider it a blessing if you would just allow this old body to return to my hometown and prepare a place to bury my bones." With that, he walked straight out of the royal presence. He wandered through the mountains and rivers for the next 4 years before suddenly dying a mysterious death, taking his bitter sorrow for his fallen nation to the grave. What about Gil Jae, pen name Yayun, who, along with Jung Mongju and Yi Saek, was known as one of the 3 Yun scholars? Gil Jae had served as a royal secretary during the reign of King Chang of Goryeo. When the current new king, then Chancellor Yi, deposed King Chang under the false pretext that he was of Shindon's bloodline and placed King Gongyang on the throne, Gil Jae indignantly threw away his official posts, returned to his hometown of Seonju, and lived out his days serving his elderly mother. He had studied together with Grand Prince Bangwon, the new king's 5th son. Because of this connection, the king summoned Gil Jae after taking the throne. But Gil Jae did not come. Every time he was called, he merely sent a letter expressing his refusal and refused to move. Much later, Bangwon ordered government officials to forcibly bring Gil Jae to Seoul. He was offered a high academic post, but Gil Jae refused to enter the palace, resigned immediately, and wrote, "A virtuous woman does not have 2 husbands, and a loyal subject does not have 2 kings. I was originally a humble scholar who served the former dynasty and rose to the position of royal secretary. Unfortunately, I have lost my king. I beg you to allow this humble commoner to return to his hometown, care for his old mother, and spend his remaining years in peace." After submitting this letter, he vanished back into his hometown. Jo Yun was the younger brother of Jo Jun, one of the new king's most favored ministers. However, holding different principles from his brother, Jo Yun refused to serve the new king. Even during the Goryeo dynasty, when he saw his brother harboring rebellious thoughts, he wept bitterly and tried to stop him. "Is our family not a precious pillar of this nation? If we, who should share the nation's fate, act like this, what will become of us?" he pleaded, begging his brother to cut ties with Chancellor Yi. His brother Jun ignored him, conspired with Chancellor Yi, and helped establish the new kingdom. Although Jun became a founding merit subject, he worried about his younger brother, who remained loyal to the old dynasty, and secretly included Yun's name on the list of merit subjects. Thanks to this, Jo Yun was appointed as a minister of taxation early in the new dynasty. However, Yun immediately rejected the unwanted post. He changed his given name from Yun to Gyeon, meaning dog, changed his courtesy name to Jonggyeon, and hid deep in the Goryeo mountains. To lose one's country and fail to die is no different than being a dog. Being unable to forget one's master is like a dog. Under these sentiments, he referred to himself as a dog. He wandered from the Goryeo mountains to Mount Cheongye. He would climb to the peak, gaze toward Seoul, and weep bitterly, leading others to name that peak Songgyeong, peak of yearning for the capital. Much later, moved by this loyalty, the king personally went to meet him. Jo-yun, now Jo-gyeon, still refused to bow and spoke disrespectfully. The king generously overlooked it all. He even had a stone room built in the mountains for him to live in. But Jo-gyeon refused even that and fled again to Mount Songsan in Yeongju. Won Chun-seok, another scholar of the old dynasty, was also summoned but refused to move. Years later, King Taejong personally sought Won Chun-seok deep in Mount Chiak, but Won Chun-seok hid and refused to meet him. When Won Chun-seok later died, his final will to his descendants was that the chest containing the unofficial history he had written during his life must not be opened unless a true sage appeared in the family. 4 generations later, his great-grandson finally opened the chest. Inside was the unvarnished history of the late Goryeo period, vastly different from the history of Goryeo fabricated by the Yi dynasty of Joseon. Terrified that keeping such a thing would lead to the extermination of their entire bloodline, the descendants immediately burned it to ashes. Kim Ja-soo had a long-standing friendship with the new king. The king summoned him several times after ascending the throne, but he did not respond. Finally, when King Taejong ordered the Minister of Punishments to summon him, Kim Ja-soo bid farewell to his family shrine that very day, fled to Churyong Pass, wept bitterly, saying, "Who knew this day would come?" and took poison to end his own life. Kim Jin-yang, So-jin, Yi Sung-in, Yi Jip, Yi Go, Yun Chung-bo, and countless others, all were summoned, but without exception, they all avoided the new king and went into hiding. It wasn't just them. The common people were incredibly apathetic toward the establishment of this new nation. When the ministers of the new state paraded down the streets in grand processions, the people would hide in the alleys. This was not a display of respect, but rather because they despised the sight of them and wanted to avoid it. Let alone the ministers. Even when the king himself traveled, the people firmly shut their doors and refused to look outside. For the new king, who had the experience of serving 4 Goryeo kings, Gongmin, U, Chong, and Gongyang, this was deeply troubling. During the Goryeo era, whenever the king made an appearance, men and women of all ages would pour into the streets, cheering and bowing, especially the young King Yu, who often rode out alone on horseback. When his brilliant figure appeared outside the palace gates, the people would surround him with joyous blessings. In those days, the king and the people shared an affection akin to that between a father and son. In stark contrast, the current atmosphere was unbearably desolate. He and his few loyal subjects might be excitedly celebrating the creation of a new nation, but why were the people, who should be rejoicing with them, so indifferent? And not just indifferent, but looking upon them with cold eyes. In a sense, this new country didn't feel like a nation of the people, but rather the private property of a few individuals. You have your world, and we have ours. That was the attitude the people held toward the new nation. Why was this? Looking back over 500 years to the founding of the Goryeo kingdom, when the great hero Wang Jian rose up, absorbed Silla, and then unified the realms of Gungye and Gyeonhwan, when he inherited the 1,000-year legacy of Silla intact, did the people of Silla not serve their new king without a word? Did Silla's ministers not bow to him without complaint? Even the king of Silla, in awe of the new king's character, voluntarily surrendered his country, brought his family to the Goryeo capital, and lived out his days in peace. If a 1,000-year dynasty could change hands without a single cough of protest, why was there so much trouble taking over a 500-year dynasty? Moreover, Wang Geon had to use military force several times to absorb Silla, whereas he had swallowed Goryeo without deploying a single soldier. Despite this, why were the old ministers and people of this land so cold? A nation is only truly formed when the king and the people unite. Currently, this new nation had a king, but no people. Here, the new king truly realized the power of moral virtue. The people of this land couldn't openly rebel because they were no match for his power. Force could make them bow their heads, but it couldn't make them bow their hearts. He also realized that he lacked the innate capacity to radiate such moral influence on his own. Thus, he urgently decided to summon the great monk Muhak. Muhak, whom he had met long ago in the cave on Mount Solbong, seemed entirely capable of supplementing the moral influence the new king lacked. According to rumors, Muhak was hiding in a mountain temple in the Goryeo region. The king issued urgent orders to the governors of Gyeonggi, Hwanghae, and Pyongan provinces to locate the monk and escort him to the capital. Yet he still worried whether Muhak would actually come. Since everyone he called had fled, it felt as though Muhak might refuse to come as well. One day, not long after his ascension, the king sat in his private quarters with a few favored ministers, discussing strategies to manage this newly established nation. Suddenly, he sighed. "Why do I lack virtue so much?" The ministers looked up in surprise. "Is my virtue truly less than that of King Gongyang?" They served Gongyang, but they refused to serve Yi Songgye. The ministers remained silent. They didn't know how to answer. It was a bitter reality they were all experiencing. Among themselves, they celebrated the new nation, but it was a hollow kingdom with no one else to share in the joy. After a long silence, Jung Dojin, the most brilliant mind among the founding merit subjects, finally spoke up. "Your Majesty, how about holding a civil service examination? If we hold an examination, and even a single official from the old dynasty steps forward to take it, others might follow. Human nature is strange. It's hard to be the first to step forward, but once someone leads the way, others usually follow." Coming from Jung Dojun, known as the Bag of Wisdom, it made sense. Will they come? Well, if we announce the exam publicly and gently force their hands behind the scenes, they won't have a choice but to come. How do we force their hands? Since this is the first examination of the new government, we declare that even those who served in the former dynasty must pass this exam to have their past ranks recognized. Furthermore, we spread rumors among the people that any former students of the National Academy or military officials who fail to take the exam will face severe consequences. Wouldn't the timid scholars or ambitious military men show up? And once we grant official posts to just a few, the older officials who were holding back out of pride might slowly crawl out as well. Who knows? Jung Dojun smiled knowingly. It was a plausible plan. After a moment, the king also smiled. "Let's try it. There's no harm in doing so. Prepare the procedures." The next day, the first civil service examination decree of the new government was issued. As per Jung Dojun's advice, it stat 1. Both civil and military examinations will be held. 2. Even those who held office in the former dynasty will not have their ranks recognized unless they pass this new examination. 3. Anyone who may have committed acts offensive to the new court will have their past crimes forgiven, provided they take this examination. 4. As this is the first event of the new court, former officials are specially permitted to take the exam. However, from the next examination onward, those who served the former dynasty will not be accepted into the court. It was a decree laced with heavy threats. Simultaneously, agents were dispatched to spread rumors that any former official who refused to take the exam would be seen as actively defying the new nation and would face severe punishment. The schedule was set. Day 1, civil examination. Day 2, military examination. On the first day, the king, accompanied by his favored ministers, traveled to Gyeongdeokgung Palace, the examination site. Everyone looked anxious. How many would come? Based on secret investigations, it didn't seem like many would show up. As all the ministers knew well, in the past, whenever the examination season approached, not only the scholars and warriors of the capital, but throngs of people from every corner of Goryeo would flood Seoul, making the city boil with excitement. Everywhere you went, the talk was of the exam. The sight of country scholars marveling at the capital was ubiquitous, but this time it was too quiet. A few people seemed to have come up from the countryside, but how many could they be? "Your Majesty, the capital is quite bustling with civil and military candidates arriving from the provinces," one minister offered, though everyone knew it was a lie. They waited anxiously for the exam time. In the past, the site would be swarming with candidates long before the start, and the king would arrive leisurely. This time, even after the king had arrived, only a handful of country folks were milling about the empty grounds. They delayed the start for another 15 minutes, hoping more would come. But the vast courtyard remained empty, save for those few country scholars. Around the time the exam was supposed to start, from the main hall of Gyeongdeokgung where the king sat, a bizarre procession could be seen passing over the ridge of the opposite hill, heading steadily westward. Men dressed in traditional robes, wearing humble bamboo hats, carrying straw mats on their backs. They walked with their heads buried in their chests, not casting a single glance toward the palace. One passed, then another followed, and then another. A significant number of people crossed the ridge in this manner. Suppressing his anxiety and displeasure, the king, acting as the chief examiner, could not just ignore these strangely dressed figures. He ordered a courtier to find out who they were. They were the students of the old dynasty's National Academy, the Confucian scholars of the Wang dynasty. They were refugees of a ruined nation, abandoning their ancestral capital of Seoul to escape this forced examination and avoid future purges. What? Fury and deep emotion washed over the king. Overwhelmed by indescribable feelings, his eyes welled up with tears. Ah, am I truly this despised? Your Majesty, please calm yourself. They are scholars who studied under Jungmongju for a long time. They are stubborn fools. But surely the military men will come. Tomorrow is their turn. Tomorrow, all the former military officers will likely come to take the exam. When Namun spoke up to comfort the king glared at him with displeasure. The hearts of all Goryeo's people have turned to you, Chancellor Yi. Let us rise now. Let us tear down the rotten Wang dynasty and build a great new enterprise. Weren't these the very men who had urged him every day, pushing him until he finally stood up and seized this throne? Hadn't all these ministers sitting before Hai M spoken with one voice, claiming the people's hearts had completely shifted to him? He hadn't entirely fallen for their words, but he never expected the people of Goryeo to remain this fiercely attached to the old dynasty. He had believed his colleagues, his current ministers. Because he believed them, he rose up. Had he known the people of Goryeo were still so loyal to the Wang clan, he never would have rebelled in the first place. And now, what was this pathetic sight? Had all these so-called merit subjects lied to him solely for their own fame and power? A nation without people. The king repeatedly smacked his lips in bitter resentment. The number of National Academy students who fled Seoul that day totaled 72. Unable to bear leaving the capital where their ancestors had lived for generations, the students had paused on the outskirts of the city, looking back and weeping. While they cried, they encountered other refugees following the same path. One by one they gathered until there were 72 of them. They all knew each other. They were comrades who had served the same king with one heart as brothers in the former dynasty. Now, having lost their country, their king, their positions, and their status, they embarked on a journey of exile with no destination, driven only by the thought that they could no longer remain in this city. It was an exile without a destination or a plan. Serve Chancellor Yi Songgyeong, such a monstrous thought had never crossed their minds. The Wang clan was gone, so how could there be a king who wasn't a Wang? Although the current nation was still nominally called Goryeo, they did not view it as the Goryeo they knew. How could they serve a new Goryeo that wasn't truly Goryeo? Thus, these 72 men wept over the final moments of their 500-year-old capital. Embracing the twilight sun in their hearts, they reached the foot of Mount Mansu, established a village solely for the refugees of the ruined nation, firmly locked their doors, and cut off all ties with the outside world. In the end, not a single civil official from the former dynasty took the exam. The next day was the military examination. Feeling thoroughly displeased, the king didn't even want to go to Gyeongdeokgung. The image of the exiled scholars crossing the ridge the day before kept flashing in his mind, mocking his current throne. Even if they held the exam today, it would likely just be a few country bumpkins again. He wanted to cancel the whole farce, but canceling the very first examination of the new government would only damage the government's prestige further, so he went to the palace, feeling helpless. Military men are different from scholars. I believe many former military officers will come today. Seeing the king's dark expression, the ministers offered these consolations, though they clearly didn't believe their own words, giving the king no reason to believe them either. Still, he carried a sliver of hope. But that hope, too, was an illusion. In the exact opposite direction from yesterday, crossing the hill opposite Songgyeong Palace, a procession of military men wearing mourning hats woven from mugwort marched from west to east, one after another. These were the military men, the bold and uninhibited warriors who used to scoff at minor formalities. Men who, until a few months ago, didn't even know what a gloomy expression looked like. Yet today, walking with steps just as heavy and lifeless as the civil scholars from the day before, they crossed the hill one by one. The king did not open his mouth all day. The ministers didn't speak either. Without even looking at each other's faces, they spent the day in a dark, oppressive atmosphere. Only when returning to the palace that evening did the king utter a single sentence. "Did I truly possess so little virtue?" Without any minister offering a clever reply to this lamentation, the monarch and his subjects returned to Songgyeong Palace. Thus, the examinations failed to secure a single civil or military official from the former dynasty, yielding only a handful of rural scholars and soldiers. These events only made the king more desperate to find the monk Muhak, hoping to borrow the virtue he so clearly lacked. The military officers who left Seoul that day gathered one by one in the eastern suburbs, eventually forming a group of 48. They reached the foot of Mount Bobong, and just like the civil scholars before them, established their own village. In popular history, the place where the 72 civil scholars hid became known as West Dumundong, while the place where the 48 military officers hid was called East Dumundong. It was a bitter, humiliating failure. For days after receiving the formal bows of the few new officials selected from the exam, with great displeasure, the king refused to leave his inner chambers. The image of the exiled refugees constantly floated before his eyes, seemingly mocking his newly seized throne. Amidst this, his only lingering hope was the search for Muhak. He had ordered the governors of 3 provinces to find him, so the search must be underway. He needed to find Muhak quickly to gather the public support his own lack of virtue could not muster, to secure the foundation of the new state. A few days later, the king finally emerged into the administrative hall, summoned Jeongdojeon, and discussed changing the name of the country. The name change had already been internally decided, but for various reasons of convenience, they had left the country's name as Goryeo. First, changing the name immediately might cause the people to outright reject the new dynasty. Second, they wanted to create the illusion for the former officials that the country was still Goryeo, that just as the throne passed from Gongmin to U, to Chang, and to Gongyang, only the ruler had changed, not the nation itself. Third, for diplomatic camouflage regarding the Ming dynasty, they feared that drastically changing the name would lead Ming to refuse recognition of the new state. But now, there was no need to maintain the charade of Goryeo. No matter how long they called it Goryeo, the subjects of the old dynasty would never view Yi's new nation as an extension of Wang's Goryeo. Since the people didn't see it as Goryeo, there was no point in keeping a borrowed name that only brought up unpleasant associations. The Ming dynasty issue also couldn't be handled with mere camouflage anymore. Some of the former Goryeo officials, finding it too filthy to even remain on Yi's land, were constantly fleeing across the border to China. Since they were fleeing in disgust, the news of the regime change would naturally reach the Ming court's ears in the worst possible light. Therefore, they decided to change the old name, Goryeo, to the new name, Joseon. They urgently sent an envoy to the Ming capital to seek approval for the new name, to clearly ascertain Ming's intentions, and to offer excuses for overthrowing the Wang dynasty. Simultaneously, they decided to employ coercive policies. The king had initially held back, hoping to win hearts the way Goryeo's founder Wang Geon had peacefully absorbed Silla. But with his fiery, martial temperament, the new king could not wait any longer. Royal envoys were repeatedly sent to East Dumundong and West Dumundong to summon the 48 military men and 72 scholars, but the gates remained firmly shut, and the residents refused even to meet the envoys. Meanwhile, the citizens of Seoul were forced to welcome the new government. Oppression rained down. Yet, no matter what they did, the people of the former dynasty refused to welcome the new king with joy. After establishing the new nation, organizing it was an immensely busy task. Had it not been for Jeongdojeon, a genius rare in history, the king would never have been able to handle it. Ideas flowed continuously from Songgyeong, a man who seemed mad, entirely of intellect. He changed the architectural design of houses. Previously, if one sat at the warmer end of the main room, they would naturally face east, while the opposite room faced south. The rooms themselves were oriented south and east. This was the most ordinary, common-sense architectural layout humanity could devise unless dictated by specific policies. Songgyeong ordered this to be changed. He established a new design, a central wooden floor facing south, with the main room on the west facing east toward the floor, the opposite room on the east facing west, and the kitchen extending south from the main room. This is the standard layout of traditional houses near modern Seoul. In such a house, if one sat at the warm end of the room, they naturally had to face north. Since the people of Goryeo refused to bow northward toward the new king, this architectural rule forced them to face north, at least physically. He also strictly differentiated the height of noblemen's houses from commoners' houses, forcibly lowering the physical status of the common people. He elevated and strictly enforced the authority of government officials, ensuring that the people, even if they didn't submit in their hearts, would obey out of fear. They decided to suppress Buddhism and promote Confucianism. This was a strategy that killed 3 birds with 1 stone. First, by suppressing Buddhism and honoring Confucianism, they flattered the Ming dynasty, hoping to quickly win its favor and approval. Second, they hoped to win the sympathy of the Confucian scholars among the Goryeo loyalists. Third, they aimed to completely eradicate the traditional religion of the old dynasty, wiping away even the scent of Goryeo. The pronunciation of the very common surname Gum meant metal. Since metal chops wood, the meaning of yi, oud, plum tree, the pronunciation was banned and forcibly changed to Kim. Claiming that the people of the Goryeo region were too stubborn and fiery, they decreed that no one from Pyongan province would be appointed to key government positions. The oppression against the former Goryeo officials, whom they had at least tried to conciliate initially, gradually intensified. Meanwhile, they fabricated various prophecies and rumors to spread the mystical belief that Chancellor Yi's acquisition of the nation was an act mandated by heaven from ancient times. It was during this time that the great monk Muhak finally arrived in the capital. Muhak had been hiding deep in Mount Godalsan in Hwanghae province until the governors of 3 provinces tracked him down and escorted him to Seoul by royal command. The king was overjoyed to see his old friend. Muhak, who had recognized the king's destiny when he was just a young general, was a deeply moving figure from his past. Late one quiet night, the king asked him, "Great monk, how can I win the hearts of the people of the former dynasty?" Muhak stared at the king expressionlessly for a moment before replying, "It will likely be impossible to win their hearts in a short time." The king's chest tightened. This very thought had been haunting him recently, making the words sting even more. "Your Majesty, you often seem to compare your enterprise to that of Goryeo's founder, but such a comparison is completely unfounded. The dynasties of Silla and Goryeo were different. You and the founder of Goryeo are different types of men, and the people of Silla and Goryeo cannot be compared. If we compare the two of you, the founder of Goryeo had more wisdom than martial prowess, while you have more tactical brilliance than virtue." Looking at the people, in the late Silla period, the government was in shambles, warlords divided the land, and the people, drowning in misery, eagerly awaited the appearance of a holy ruler. But in the late Goryeo period, although the government was somewhat lax, the people had fully bathed in the virtuous influence of Chancellor Shindan during King Gongmin's reign. Not only do they still yearn for the Wang dynasty, but regarding that lax government, forgive my insolence, you deliberately disrupted it to overthrow Goryeo. Thus, the people resent you rather than pray for your longevity. King Gyeongsun of Silla willingly handed over a nation he could no longer hold to the founder of Goryeo. You, on the other hand, forcefully overturned the thrones of the last 3 kings of Goryeo who had no intention of letting go. The end of Goryeo and the end of Silla cannot be compared. It was a bold and insolent speech, but the king listened in silence. Every word pierced his heart. Regret continuously washed over him. If only I had joined forces with Choyong and devoted all my energy to upholding Goryeo, this country would have become quite beautiful and magnificent by now. The thought that he had succumbed to vanity, spurred on by the flatteries of Jong Dojon, Nam-on, and his fifth son Bang-won, struck him strongly. But it was too late to turn back now. Since things had come this far, he had to build a great nation and make the people happy. Since the deed was done, he had to rule righteously. He must not leave behind a legacy to be mocked for 1,000 years, like the founder of the Majin kingdom. He absolutely could not leave behind the infamous reputation that Yi Songgye betrayed his king purely out of personal greed. A great nation, a good nation. After a long time, the king finally spoke. "Great monk, what is past is past. I have brought you here today so that from now on I can bestow virtue upon these people. Please do not blame the past, but put your efforts into saving these people from their misery." Muhak responded immediately. "Your Majesty must move the capital. Above all else, ordering the people who serve the Wang clan to serve the Yi clan starting today will not work. If it doesn't work, your strong temper will flare. If your temper flares, you will use force to compel them. And if force is applied, the hearts of the people will drift even further away. Abandon this 500-year-old capital and move the city. Then present yourself with virtue to the new people in the new land, allowing your moral influence to spread across the country. I believe this is the best strategy." Heeding Muhak's advice, the king decided to move the capital. He sent officials to scout for suitable locations. As he did, a story circulating among the people often came to his mind. It was a tale from King Gongmin's era. Two commoner brothers were walking down a road when the younger brother found 2 pieces of gold. He gave one to his older brother and kept the other. When they reached the banks of the Yangcheon River, the younger brother threw his gold into the water. Surprised, the older brother asked why. The younger brother replied, "All my life I have loved and respected you deeply. But today, after giving you the gold, I found myself feeling jealous. Realizing that gold is a filthy thing that creates such feelings, I threw it away." Hearing this, the older brother struck his chest, agreed with his brother, and threw his own gold into the river as well. This story was entirely a product of the tremendous moral influence of Chancellor Shindan at the time. Despite holding power for only 6 years, how deeply had his virtue permeated the minds of the common people. The fact that the people still desperately yearned for the Goryeo dynasty, even after the long periods of King Yu, 14 years, King Chang, 1 year, and King Gongyang, 4 years, must be because that past moral influence was so profound. Whether Muhak's virtue could match Shindan's was yet unknown. But Muhak was also an enlightened high monk, different from ordinary men. He needed to borrow Muhak's hands and carefully study how to apply such moral influence. Thus, the king kept Muhak in Seoul as his royal preceptor and did not neglect his own moral cultivation, an area in which he as currently deficient. He eagerly searched for a place to build the new capital, but a suitable location didn't readily appear. The king began to feel increasingly uncomfortable in Songgyeong Palace. This palace, built during King Yu's reign, was the very place that had housed the 3 previous kings of Goryeo, Yu, Chang, and Gongyang. It felt strange to play the master on the throne he used to bow before, without even daring to look up. It was especially unsettling to sleep in the bedchambers used by the last 3 kings, all of whom had met gruesome ends by his own hands. Furthermore, although he kept some of the beautiful court ladies from the former dynasty and occasionally called them to his bed, his conscience weighed heavily on him. Sometimes, while walking through the palace grounds, where he once had to walk with a bowed back, supported by eunuchs, he would suddenly feel a pang of terror, half expecting the young King Yu to charge out of the woods on horseback. Though he had finally ascended the throne he had coveted for so long, this crown brought more anxiety than joy. The 11th day of the 10th lunar month that year. It was the king's birthday, his first since taking the throne. Because it was his first birthday as a monarch, the celebration inside the palace was grand. However, the only people celebrating and congratulating him were the king himself and his handful of ministers. The vast city of Goryeo, with its 100,000 residents, was utterly silent. There wasn't a trace of celebratory spirit anywhere. In fact, it was even more desolate than a normal day. Because of this, while the banquet inside the palace seemed lively on the surface, the dark, oppressive undercurrent could not be ignored. During this banquet, a bizarre incident occurred. Among the entertainers was a gisang named Solmay. She was exceedingly skilled in singing and dancing, exceptionally beautiful, and known for her sharp, unyielding tongue. A minister, slightly drunk, joked with her, "They say you eat at the East House in the morning and sleep at the West House at night. How about spending a night with me?" Solmay immediately replied, "I am a lowly servant who eats in the East and sleeps in the West. So I suppose I am a perfect match for your excellency, who served the Wang clan yesterday and serves the Yi clan today." An instant, chilling silence fell over the room. Amidst the tension, the quiet sobbing of a few former Goryeo officials, who had attended the banquet only under duress, could be heard. The king saw all of this, but he pretended not to notice. But his heart stung. Even a lowly gisang could not forget the Wang dynasty. "I must move the capital. Even if I truly spread virtue here, there are no people willing to accept it. I wish the dynasty I founded could become strong as well." Thus, the king realized more acutely that it would take an immense amount of time and effort to assimilate the people of Songgyeong and the former officials. He felt a desperate need to move the capital quickly so his royal influence could actually take effect. After the banquet, he quietly summoned Jeong Do-jeon and urged him to finalize the site for the new capital. They were choosing between Mount Goryeo and Hanyang, Seoul, leaning more heavily toward Goryeo, and were conducting various surveys. He wanted to escape Songgyeong, the capital of Goryeo, as soon as possible. Moreover, a few members of the Wang clan were showing signs of plotting to overthrow the new government. Remaining in this city felt like sitting on a powder keg. "Let us quickly find a land where I can freely unfold all the grand visions I hold in my heart." With these thoughts, the king grew increasingly impatient. The winter of that year passed without any significant achievements. No great deeds were accomplished, but a succession of unpleasant events occurred. In the first year of Yi's Goryeo, late in the 12th lunar month, another disturbing incident took place, further souring the mood of the new king and his court. And because of this incident, the loyalists of Wang's Goryeo once again whispered among themselves, weeping for their lost nation. The incident was straightforward. During the reign of Songgyeong, the last king of Wang's Goryeo, a man named Gumju was sent to the Ming capital as an envoy. While Gumju was fulfilling his duties in Ming, his homeland underwent a violent upheaval. Wang's Goryeo fell, and the new Yi's Goryeo was established. Being thousands of miles away, Gumju had no way of knowing this tragedy had struck his country. After perfectly completing his mission, he hurried back, eager to report his success to his king. To see his king and his family as soon as possible, he rushed to the Yalu River, only to hear shocking news. Wang's Goryeo had fallen. Chancellor Yi Songgye was the new king. Gumju felt dizzy. Cross one river and he was in his homeland. But was it still his homeland? The mountains and rivers were the same, the people were the same, but the master had changed. Could it still be called home? He desperately wanted to see his wife and children, but he refused to set foot in a land ruled by a new master. There at the riverbank, Gumju resolved never to enter the country again. He took off his official robes and shoes and had his servant deliver them to his home in Seoul. "A loyal subject cannot serve two kings. Even if I cross the river, there is no place for my body to rest, so I shall return to the Central Plains, China. Consider this day, December 22nd, the anniversary of my death, and bury these robes and shoes as if they were my body." With that message sent home, he turned back. At a time when dissatisfaction was already threatening to explode, this incident threw Songgyeong into turmoil once again. Whispers here, whispers there. Whenever people gathered, they spoke of this, shedding tears as they did. Watching the people of the former dynasty persistently refuse to submit, the new king's heart began to harden. Damn it, these stubborn fools. The king was originally a military man. He tried to suppress his fiery temper, but it only flared hotter day by day. "Great monk, One day, sitting across from Muhak, the new king called out with a displeased voice, "Yes, your majesty. Great monk, must I bestow virtue even upon a people who refuse to receive it? The giving of virtue lies with your majesty, but the desire to receive it lies with the people, does it not? To force virtue upon them is worse than not asking at all. Rather than forcing it upon the people of the former dynasty who loathe to bathe in it, I believe you should show your virtue to new people in a new place." Is that so? Even if the founder of Goryeo was a man of great virtue, had he established his capital in Gerim, the capital of Silla, I believe he would have surely failed. First of all, your majesty has taken the throne. Is it because there is no other land that you remain stuck here? Press your ministers to quickly select the new capital and focus your efforts on moving as soon as possible. That is the most urgent task. My mind is anxious, but things rarely go as I wish. With his fiery temper, he wanted nothing more than to unleash his soldiers and slaughter every last one of the insubordinate subjects. Despite it being a year of supposed celebration, the new court spent it in a foul mood. In January of the following year, Goryeo, the approval for the change of national name requested from the Ming dynasty the previous year, finally arrived. They had been waiting anxiously for it. The new nation still had no loyal subjects. The king and his ministers called each other king and subject among themselves, but outside the palace, nothing resembled a real nation. On top of that, without the formal recognition of the Ming dynasty, its existence as a state was incredibly fragile. If the people had completely submitted, the state could have survived even without Ming's approval. If the king, the government, and the people all recognized themselves as a perfect single nation, Ming would eventually have no choice but to acknowledge them. For founding a new nation, this would undoubtedly be the best path. But since the people absolutely refused to yield, they had to seek another method. If they could get the Ming dynasty to recognize them as an independent state, they could hold their ground, regardless of the people's insubordination. And if they held their ground long enough, perhaps one day the people would finally submit. To win the people over, they had temporarily kept the old name Goryeo as a trick, but the people were not fooled. Therefore, they decided to discard the old name of the Wang clan and adopt the Yi clan's new name, Joseon, and requested Ming's permission, which had finally been granted. The approval of the national name meant that the Ming dynasty recognized this new nation. Now half of their fears were gone. Though the order was backward, with Ming's approval secured, they could now rightfully rule over the people under this new name. The trick the Yi government used to secure this name was remarkably clever. It was a masterpiece of Songgyeong's intellect. After long deliberation, he chose a minister named Zhou Ban as the envoy for this critical mission. Zhou Ban was raised in China, fluent in Chinese, and well-versed in Chinese documents. Songgyeong fed him a specific strategy before sending him off. Just as Songgyeong anticipated, the Ming Emperor Hongwu scolded Zhou Ban as soon as he granted him an audience. He declared he could not recognize a new dynasty founded by a subject who had rebelled against and overthrown his own king. In response, Zhou Ban, using his fluent Chinese and following Songgyeong's instructions, bowed and replied, "Your Majesty, your humble servant is ignorant and does not know much, but I believe there is no founding monarch in history who has not walked this path. Your Majesty calls it a subject striking the king, but I believe it is a revolution conforming to the will of heaven, not a mere rebellion." This was, of course, a defense of the new Yi dynasty. But hidden beneath the surface was a subtle jab at the founding of the Ming dynasty itself. Did not the Ming dynasty, which broke away from the Yuan dynasty, also involve a subject striking a king? It's not just Goryeo. Your Majesty also shares this past. This implication was heavily embedded in his words. Emperor Hongwu had no counter-argument. He then praised Zhou Ban's fluency in Chinese. To this, Zhou Ban gave an answer guaranteed to win the emperor's favor. "Your humble servant was raised in the Central Plains. Long ago, I had the honor of seeing your Majesty in the military camp of Togtoa. A military commander of modest rank back then has today received the mandate of heaven to become the emperor of a great nation." Thus, he maneuvered the Ming emperor into a position where he could no longer condemn Yi's Goryeo as a mere rebellion. Ultimately, they received approval for the name Joseon and had Ming recognize Yi Songgye as the king of Joseon. Now they had nothing to fear under heaven. The people might not submit, but their resistance was passive. They didn't know how to actively rebel. If the government ordered something, they simply didn't do it. If pushed too hard, they hid somewhere else. That was all. It was annoying and unpleasant, but not dangerous. Meanwhile, what happened to the 72 civil scholars of West Dumundong and the 48 military officers of East Dumundong who had fled the new government's oppression? The new government had sent people several times to try and draw them out. They tried soothing words, they offered lucrative positions, but the scholars and warriors rejected the appeasement, the temptations, and the threats. They kept their doors firmly shut, living strictly as refugees of a ruined nation. The new government wanted to bring them out partly because they valued their talents, but primarily because they hoped that appointing them to high positions would help win over the hearts of the other Goryeo loyalists. However, since they refused to respond to any coaxing or threats, time passed, and the government simply forgot about their existence. In the frantic rush of establishing a new nation and organizing its administration, the men of Dumundong slipped from their minds. In the meantime, the new nation secured the name Joseon from Ming and established a solid foundation. The movements of a mere 120 individuals hiding in Dumundong became so insignificant that the new government no longer needed to worry about them. They felt no threat. They saw no use for them. As the men themselves claimed, they were practically the living dead. They breathed and their blood circulated, but to the world, they were forgotten entities. What the new government truly feared now was not these 120 men, but those who bore the surname Wang, the royal relatives of the former dynasty, the families of the former masters of this nation. Though these people with long sleeves had no real power to be feared, the new court, knowing what it had done, felt constantly uneasy leaving them be. If left alone, they felt certain some future disaster would erupt. Leaving them alive was terrifying, but eliminating them required a justifiable crime, which they lacked. If it were 10 or 20 people, they could handle it somehow, but how could they dispose of hundreds of Wangs? One day, a notice was posted on every street corner and alleyway. It was a summons for the Wang clan. When the royal lineage changes, it is the ancient custom to exterminate the family of the former king. However, due to the exceptional magnanimity of His Majesty, you have been allowed to live as subjects in this era of peace. Yet, leaving you completely without restriction disrupts the order of the law. Therefore, all members of the Wang clan will be exiled to nearby islands. You should be moved to tears by this lenient punishment. But this is not all. Though you are ordered into exile to uphold the law, this is only temporary. Before long, His Majesty plans to recall you, and treating everyone with equal benevolence, foster your prosperity. How will you repay this holy grace? You may be the royal relatives of the former dynasty, but did you ever witness such a magnificent act of mercy during the former dynasty? By the specified date of X, finish all preparations and gather at the beach of Y. Dozens of ships will be waiting to escort you to the islands. The date X provides ample time for preparation. Be sure to gather at the beach of Y without fail. However, some fools might misunderstand this holy intention and use petty tricks to avoid this lenient disposition. Even our magnanimous Majesty will show no mercy to those who try to play games. Do not choose the path of self-destruction. Bathe in this merciful grace. After the deadline of X, if anyone bearing the surname Wang is found within the mainland, outside the exile zones, that person will never see the light of day again. Do not take advantage of His Majesty's generosity. This disposition is final. Reading these notices plastered everywhere, the citizens of Songgyeong tilted their heads in confusion. It was indeed an unexpectedly lenient punishment. Knowing well the harsh punishments inflicted on a few Wangs and former officials, and especially the fate of the 3 deposed kings, the citizens felt this sentence was far too light. The members of the Wang clan in particular were overjoyed upon reading the notice. They had been living in constant terror, hiding and moving in secret, never knowing when or under what pretext punishment would fall upon them. But according to the notice, it was merely island exile. The Wang clan was genuinely moved to tears by this light sentence. The day designated by the new government arrived. Every person bearing the surname Wang gathered at the specified location. Those who had sprouted from a single father 500 years ago, whose familial ties had now grown too distant to trace, every single Wang assembled. People who had expected death found a way to survive. Even though they were heading into exile, they all smiled brightly, as if they were off to a celebration. They had no idea this was their final journey in this world. Dreaming of a future where they would live on an island for a few years, receive a pardon, and return to society as normal citizens, they boarded the dozens of ships prepared by the officials. Friends seeing them off, the Wangs departing, though it was a farewell for exile, they exchanged partings with laughter, grateful just to be alive. With the wind in their sails, the ships headed out to the open sea. When the ships were so far out that the people on the shore could barely see them, the sound of a conch shell echoed from the rearmost vessel. Serving as a signal, a horrific event began on each ship. Holes had been pre-drilled into the bottoms of the ships and plugged. Now the crews pulled all the plugs simultaneously. The government officials, specifically chosen for their excellent swimming abilities, threw off their outer garments and dove into the sea. While the officials swam back to shore, the ships, packed tightly with people, all capsized. The sound of crying and screaming. A shocking tragedy unfolded on the open ocean. Men and women, young and old, hundreds of lives whose only crime was being descendants of the Wang clan, turned into vengeful spirits of the sea. A few knew how to swim, but with officials guarding the shore, not a single one survived. The only person bearing the surname Wang who officially escaped this massacre was Wang Yu. He survived solely because his daughter was married to Bang Baeon, the son of the new king of Joseon. Other than him, there might have been one or two Wangs hiding in remote mountain villages. Historical records mention an illegitimate son of Wang Hu who hid among the commoners, survived through the reigns of Taizhou and Songgyeong, and was discovered during King Taizong's reign, sparking a debate on whether to execute him. There were also a few who had already been exiled to places like Goryeo Island before the Maritime Massacre. The night he drowned the Wang clan in the sea. Having seen countless deaths on the battlefield since his youth, the king considered throwing hundreds of Wangs into the sea as just another mundane event, nothing serious enough to weigh on his mind. He quickly forgot about it. But that night, the king experienced something truly terrifying in his dreams. The founder of Goryeo, Taizhou, though the king didn't know how he recognized him as such, fully dressed in imperial robes, stood at the head of his bed, drew his sword, stomped his feet, and thundered. 500 years ago, when 3 nations were warring in chaos on this land, you know it was I who united them into one. There is no one born on this land who has not bathed in the merits I achieved then. Yet you have not only stolen my throne, but completely exterminated my innocent descendants, leaving no seed behind. Know that I, too, know how to exact revenge. The king woke up in shock. He had felt no guilt. Why did he have such a dream? Drenched in sweat, he could not fall back asleep and sat up for the rest of the night. Before dawn broke, he ordered his eunuchs to urgently summon the great monk Muhak. After hearing the king's dream, Muhak stared piercingly at the king for a long time. Only then did he speak. Why did your majesty exterminate the Wang clan? Because of potential future trouble? No, you are deceiving yourself. Are you truly afraid of the Wang clan? Are you, your majesty, afraid of the remnants of the Wang clan who possess not an inch of iron in their hands, no funds to plot a rebellion, and who are scattered, desperately seeking places to hide? This incident, I believe, stems purely from your excessive boldness. A king must cherish even a single strand of hair of his subjects, and never sever it without absolute necessity. Why do you casually slaughter hundreds of living souls without realizing how terrifying a deed it is? Since ancient times, those who have established new dynasties by the mandate of heaven have elevated the remaining members of the former dynasty, granting them titles and lands to honor their ancestors. This poor monk has never heard of anyone exterminating an entire bloodline. If this were the act of General Yi Songgye, one might marvel at his reckless courage. But as the action of a nation's monarch, it is truly bizarre. Did you not summon this poor monk from Mount Godalson to consult on such matters? Why did you execute this deed without discussing it with me? If you continue to act this way, I have nothing more to say. Even as Muhak scolded him like a child, the king just listened in silence. The king truly regretted the incident. Politically, it was a massive blunder. The people of Goryeo had not yet trusted or revered the new government, but this event pushed their animosity to the extreme. That cowardly, deceptive tactic. It would have been better if he had openly arrested and executed them. The people viewed the cowardly act of luring people to a watery grave under the guise of a lenient disposition as utterly despicable and filthy. When the ministers of the new dynasty paraded down the streets, flanked by servants shouting for the crowds to clear the way, people in the alleys would mock them. My, how lenient they look. That's the bastard who'd drown you with his lenient disposition. New insults like these were born among the commoners, and the people, who used to maintain a passive silence in all matters, slowly began to rebel. Clashes between soldiers or officials and the commoners erupted here and there. In the past, the people would quietly slip away even if the officials picked a fight. But now, the people would provoke the officials and actively try to start trouble. Because of the massive failure regarding the Wang clan, and under the king's strict orders, the government tried its best to avoid conflicts between officials and commoners. Knowing this, the officials would try to walk away from potential disputes, but the people would follow them, eager to escalate the situation. Though they were the government meant to rule the people, and the people meant to be guided and protected by the government, they were like cats and dogs. Reconciliation was utterly impossible. After the disastrous conclusion of his handling of the Wang clan, the king firmly resolved never to commit such an act again and agonized over it. However, with his inherently fiery martial temper, his anger often threatened to explode. And when his anger did explode, the resulting actions always ended poorly. As he experienced this repeatedly, he grew to detest playing king. In his days as a general, the thrill of letting his anger reach its peak and unleashing it wherever he pleased was a joy he relished. But after becoming king, being forced to suppress his rage was agonizing. The joy of riding high on a white horse, bow slung across his back, wandering freely through the mountains and rivers, he could never taste that again. Unbounded freedom that was lost forever. Even in the heat of summer, he couldn't throw off his jacket and fan his chest, nor could he jump over a wall to visit another man's daughter. Moreover, during those free days as a general, didn't the hearts of all Goryeo's people belong to him? As the invincible general acting on royal commands to subjugate the Japanese pirates, he always returned victorious. And, on his triumphant return, didn't the entire nation come out with meat and wine, joyously welcoming him? Chancellor Yi Songgye. How deeply loved and respected that name was by the whole nation. But now, sitting on this throne, though he was the supreme ruler with only heaven above him, commanding millions of subjects below, the people's love and adoration had vanished into thin air. The people who once brought out meat and wine to greet him when he passed by, now turned their faces away as if they had seen an ill omen. If I had known it would be like this, I wouldn't have taken this throne. Perhaps due to mental distress, or the life of luxury and idleness, the king's health deteriorated significantly. In the past, he would fall asleep the moment he lay down and snore loud enough to bring down the house. Now, he could not fall into a deep sleep, could not stay asleep, and would wake up 3 or 4 times a night. As his health declined, his nerves grew sharper, his anger flared more easily, and his days filled with increasing displeasure. The king constantly pushed for the speedy construction of the new palace in Hanyang. The weaker his nerves became, the more he loathed the Goryeo capital, and the more unbearable it felt to reside in Songgyeong Palace. At the same time, the king began to feel dissatisfied with Muhak. Initially, he brought him in hoping to replicate the relationship King Gongmin had with Shindon. But once Muhak arrived, the reality was far from the expectation. First, Muhak was different from Shindon. Shindon was not only an enlightened monk, but a man possessing political acumen, broad-mindedness, and leadership. Moreover, he possessed a nationalistic bias that outweighed generic Buddhist universal love. In contrast, Muhak was merely a moralistic monk. He tried to analyze every issue purely from a moral standpoint and lacked the capability to develop or resolve political matters. Furthermore, while Shindan possessed an innate, astonishing charisma, Muhak tried to suppress others with theories and logic using his tongue. Just as Shindan and Muhak were different, the king himself was the exact opposite of King Gongmin in every way. King Gongmin was born a prince, spent his youth in the Yuan imperial court, and had a gentle nature accustomed to being a ruler. When he entrusted affairs to Shindan, he gave him total authority, stepping back to spend his days reminiscing about his deceased queen, merely nodding like an elder statesman when the chancellor reported on political progress. But the new king, a former military general who had placed the crown on his own head with his own hands, was the type of man who could not rest unless he personally directed and oversaw everything. No matter how much he trusted someone, he could never feel at ease unless he held the ultimate command. Because the two sides were so different, his attempt to use Muhak as Gongmin used Shindan failed. Sometimes, when Muhak thought he was giving honest advice and spoke insolently without regard for time or place, a surge of deep displeasure would boil within the king. The king began calling for Muhak less and less. Asking for Muhak's opinion only resulted in abstract moral theories lacking any concrete practicality, so it didn't matter whether he heard them or not. Thus, although he had ascended to the supreme throne, the king's state of mind grew increasingly gloomy and dark. That year, the king erased both East and West Dumundong without a trace. It was not a calculated, deliberate decision. One day, the incident of Dumundong suddenly crossed his mind. The vivid image of those scholars wearing bamboo hats, marching in a line over the front pass during that civil exam years ago, appeared in his mind's eye. He casually asked a nearby attendant what had become of Dumundong. He asked it in passing, assuming that since it had been years, they had likely dispersed and returned to go their lives as commoners. However, the answer he received was that both East and West Dumundong still kept their gates firmly shut and lived completely cut off from the world. The king, whose nerves had been constantly on edge and irritable lately, flew into an abnormal rage upon hearing this. "You mean they didn't come out even when summoned?" "Yes, Your Majesty. They didn't come even upon royal command?" Faced with the king's irritated, dismissive tone, the attendant stammered, unsure of how to reply. Then the king continued, "There is something more terrifying than a royal command. There must be a way to drag them out. Let's see if they don't come out now." The next day, by royal command, massive amounts of brushwood were brought and piled around East and West Dumundong. Except for a small opening at the village entrance, the entire area was surrounded by brush. The brushwood was set on fire. The flames roared fiercely. Just outside the small opening at the entrance, a few government officials stood waiting. They were certain that these men, who had ignored a royal command, would undoubtedly be driven out by the fire. The officials were waiting to grab the fleeing refugees and mock them. Is the heat of the fire more terrifying than the king's command? The fire quickly engulfed the village. In less than half a day, the entire settlement was reduced to a heap of ashes. But while the flames blazed, while they subsided, and while the smoke cooled into ashes, not a single person was seen rushing out to escape the fire. The fire raged alone and died down alone in an eerie emptiness. The village simply collapsed quietly into the flames as if no one had ever been there. The 72 civil scholars of West Dumundong and the 48 military officers of East Dumundong, they all vanished silently beneath the fire, without a single scream ever being heard. The king, who had traveled to Gyeongdeokgung Palace to wait and mock the former loyalists who he assumed would fear the fire more than his orders, received the report from Dumundong. After hearing the full report, he muttered, "What terrifying bastards!" He opened his mouth to let out a loud, hearty laugh, but no sound came out. The king hastily returned to Songgyeong Palace in a panic. He ordered the royal secretariat not to record the events of the day in the official diary. He ordered the historians to ensure this event was never written into the annals. A strict gag order regarding the incident was issued across the entire nation. Two officials who foolishly boasted about the event were immediately beheaded and their heads displayed. On the civilian side, dozens of people lost their lives for the same reason. That night, the king retired to his bedchambers, but he developed severe chills and trembled like a leaf all night long. For the king, it had been an act of momentary, cruel playfulness. He truly believed that even if they ignored his summons, they would surely run out if he set a fire. He never even considered the possibility that they wouldn't flee. He was certain they would. He just wanted to pull them out, line them up, and mock them out of sheer boredom. But the civil and military subjects of both Dumundongs had quietly burned to death. Whether this was classified as suicide or murder didn't matter. The fact that he had pointlessly stolen 120 lives purely out of a fleeting sense of amusement pierced him to the core. Do I truly have the right to be a king? The horrific consequence born from a moment of playfulness, an outcome so utterly beyond his expectations, left the king completely at a loss. The gag order was enforced with brutal efficiency. Those who reported anyone violating the order received massive rewards. Anyone caught violating the order, regardless of who they were, was beheaded. It wasn't because the king was particularly compassionate, but because the results of this incident were so horrifying that he absolutely refused to leave it as a subject of gossip for future generations. Quite a few people who carelessly ran their mouths about the event ended up with their heads on pikes. Songgyeong was crushed under a dark, oppressive atmosphere. People would just twitch their lips, wanting to speak, but only stared at each other in silence. People became afraid to meet one another. Since they could never predict how they might be framed or caught, everyone stayed locked inside their homes as much as possible. The streets and alleys were deserted. The people became like mutes. Amidst this silence, only the government informants scurried east and west, their ears pricked up. Thus, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years passed. Those who had witnessed the event or heard of it firsthand gradually departed from this world. Because they took their silence to the grave, the exact truth of the Dumundong incident vanished completely from the face of the earth. Aside from the fact that 72 scholars hid in West Dumundong and 48 military men hid in East Dumundong, no one knows the whole truth. The names of those 120 men remain unknown. Whether the original 72 and 48 stayed together until the end, or if some left and others joined, changing the initial composition is unknown. The exact date of their deaths is also a mystery. Everything was shrouded behind a smokescreen, making it impossible to discern clearly. And so, this riddle will likely never be solved for all eternity. So far, we have explored the story Dark Clouds over Songgyeong by author Kim Dong-in. The final moments of the 120 civil and military officials of Dumundong, who chose the scorching flames over the king's command and willingly turned to ash, leave a heavy, lingering resonance. The naked face of a ruler who gained the whole world but fell into his own trap, trembling in solitude and terror, alongside the truth of Dumundong that was utterly concealed by that very power, strikes a chilling chord. The desperate loyalty of the Goryeo subjects, whose exact names are still not fully known today, vanishing like smoke. Perhaps this story is an eternal, unsolved riddle of history and a belated requiem dedicated to those who perished protecting their convictions. Reflecting on the noble yet sorrowful silence of the defeated, hidden beneath the glamorous records of the victors, we conclude today's story. Thank you for staying with us until the end.